Welcome to the CleanTitans channel. Today we're pleased to have Juan Diego Celemin Mojica, the EV expert and CleanTechnica correspondent for Latin America. Juan, can you share a little about your background and how you became interested in new energy vehicles?
Oh, of course. Hi, Siad. Thank you for having me here. Well, I have a not career, so to say, to arrive here because I actually started as a historian, but I ended up working and making my master's on the field of environmental history and then environmental studies in general. And I don't know, I got fascinated by EVs since I knew they existed. It was 2012, 2013, I guess. The Tesla Model S was coming out, the Nissan Leaf was already rolling, and I realized that electric cars were no longer. I thought they were like a dream, like something that didn't exist. No, they existed, and I got fascinated. But then we started seeing a few of them here in Bogota with the electric cabs that arrived in 2013, and I started following closely all the matter until things started ramping up, and then CleanTechnica got interested because they had nobody around here that could explain what's going on, because Latin America is, well, a peripheral area as far as world policies and politics go. And at that point, because they were actually paying me to learn this stuff, I started to devote a lot of time to see what governments were more committed, to see what sources were available. I started building database, my own sources of information, and I ended up being sort of a regional go-to person to ask questions about EVs. It was a very unexpected process, if I am honest with you.
So you've covered a little bit about how you got started with CleanTechnica. Any favorite part of the experience that you like to share with us working with CleanTechnica?
I the thing is, I really like writing. I have been writing a long time at various websites. Like in Quora, I have a lot of answers in Quora and those kind of places online. So the great thing about CleanTechnica is that now they were paying me to do that, and that now I could devote a lot of time that otherwise I couldn't justify myself. I had another job, I needed to work. If they are paying you, then you can actually become an expert because you can devote a lot of time to work your sources, to understand the processes, and that's the best part. I think to get paid for your hobby is pretty cool.
Excellent. Absolutely. So, what is the current state of electric vehicles in the Latin American market?
Well, I think we can divide the countries in probably four groups. So you have the leading countries, which are all smaller markets, Costa Rica, Uruguay, and Colombia. Those three are close to 10%. Costa Rica and Uruguay have already surpassed the 10% EV market share. Colombia in January was 6, 7%. December was 8. And these
Wow.
countries have very small markets. The biggest one is Colombia. It's only 200,000 cars a year. It's not a big amount. And they are heavily focused on battery electric vehicles, like purely electric vehicles. And then you have another group, which is big markets, which are mainly Chile, Brazil, and Mexico. Those are more mixed. Brazil is super invested in plug-in hybrids. Chile is more focused on battery electric vehicles. And those are between 2% and 5%. Brazil just got over 5% in December. They are growing more slowly because they are bigger. And also in the case of Brazil and Mexico, because they are more protected. They have a big industry, so you're required to produce locally if you are going to be exempt from tariffs. And then we have basically everybody else. We have a small group of countries that are around 2%, where EVs are already making some noise. Sorry, not some sound, some noise. For example, Panama, Ecuador, and I think that's it. Because all the other countries, the small ones in Central America, the small ones in South America, Bolivia, Paraguay, and one big one, which is Argentina, they are below 1%. In the case of Argentina, they are at like Salvador is also like 0.3%. EVs are basically non-existent in these markets. Argentina is the odd one out because all of the other ones are more less developed countries less integrated with the world markets. But Argentina is probably one of the, or was one of the most advanced economies in the region. Is very rare. It's very weird that they are so far behind. But I believe it's because of very, very high tariffs.
And they've had some economic challenges.
Yeah, but
But
they still have a huge vehicle market. Like our vehicle market is twice the size of Colombia's, even though they are in a crisis and we are not in a crisis here.
but they're hopefully getting out of that crisis. So, are there any initiatives that
Well,
to change the situation in Argentina, or in general, are there any initiatives driving this growth in any other countries?
I think there are in like initiatives. There are small changes that help one way or the other. So, in the case of Argentina, you have the current president. He's a highly divisive president. Is Javier Milei. He has this libertarian streak. He wants to abolish pretty much everything, but he is reducing tariffs. So that's been in a window for EV automakers and particularly for Chinese companies to enter the Argentinian market because that was not possible 6 months ago. But we don't know what's going to happen because people don't know them, and it takes a little bit of time to build confidence. In other countries, there are public interests in EVs, so the government sort of pushes them, but these are poor governments. They don't really have the means to provide a lot of subsidies or a lot of uh, back for purchases, or even to abolish tariffs because they need those sources of income. So in these other countries, I don't know. For example, Ecuador is growing fast, and I don't know why it's growing fast. And Peru is not growing fast, and I believe Peru should be growing faster, and Ecuador should be growing more slowly. But because Ecuador has subsidized gasoline, so in Ecuador it's very cheap to have a combustion car. But there are things that sometimes you don't really understand.
Well, with government finances getting more, I don't know if they have enough to continue to subsidize fuel,
they
especially if it goes up in price and then the governments have huge deficits. So Ecuador has a huge tourism market, which a lot of the people who go to Ecuador go for looking at the turtles or tourists, or they probably prefer electric vehicles, maybe.
Yeah, but I don't think there is a big renting. Cars is not that big in Colombia and Ecuador, at least. We have a lot of buses, so people usually take the buses anywhere. Um, Case of Ecuador, because they are an oil producer, if the price gets up, they actually get more money to subsidize their local consumption. But the thing is, they have tried to end the subsidy and it has not worked. People get really mad when do you try to cut that subsidy. We have something similar going on in Colombia, but it's only with diesel because this subsidized in Colombia.
So, how do you see the EV market evolving in the next 5 to 10 years in Latin America?
I think it's going to be a swift change. I think it's going to be faster than most people expect. And I think that for two reasons. The first one is that Latin America is a big region, but aside from Brazil and Argentina, the countries themselves are not that big. So, for example, in Ecuador, range EV, the one with 500 kilometers range, is already able to go basically from one extreme of the country to the other. And Chile, which is very long, it's quite easy to put a lot of stations if you have like a couple highways. You don't have this very dispersed that require like a lot of infrastructure. It's just a bunch of stations through a highway. It's easier that way. Something similar happens with Peru and Colombia because even though we are big, we tend to have very harsh geography, so we can only build one or two highways. It's very expensive to build around here because the mountains are so high, so all the traffic gets like tunneled into a couple big roads. So you don't really need that much infrastructure part. And the other one is that we are poor countries, and in poor countries, people don't have the amount of resources that a person in the Europe, in the United States has. So we tend to go with what's cheaper, and EVs are more affordable to run. They are less maintenance. So as soon as we reach price parity, and we're very close already, there is a lot of inertia going in favor of EVs because people start saying, okay, they are lasting longer than I thought. I don't have to pay a lot of maintenance. This like super cheap because electricity is much cheaper than gasoline. And poor people or less wealthy people will tend to prefer the less expensive option, even if it is less convenient. That's not like, for example, in the United States. In there, you people can choose to have the more expensive option, which is a big truck with very bad mileage because they have the money and they like the comfort, they like the space. It doesn't work like that in here. So I think it's going to be fast.
And I hear the price of EVs versus ICE, the price parity is about to happen. That has happened in some places and is going to go down very significantly very soon.
Yeah, in America, it has been very particular because it has not been a gradual process, like it has not been a slow process. You had EVs being super expensive everywhere, and then suddenly, out of the air, a new company will arrive with a new super cheap EV, and then everybody will have to lower their prices. You get a price war, and suddenly EVs are 50% cheaper, 40% cheaper. For example, in Costa Rica, it was the Geometry E, Geometry E. It arrived in the 2023 and the car is right now probably some $20,000. It costs some $20,000, and an equivalent combustion car is going to cost $18,000 or $17,000. So the difference is very small. In Colombia, it happened last year with the BYD Seagull. And for example, in Colombia, if you go to the BYD Seagull and these small cars, like the combustion cars are still much cheaper. They are like 30 or cheaper. But for cars in the 25 plus K US dollar cost, you can see that we already can claim price parity. Like you can get a decent small SUV for like $26,000. You can get a big sedan for like $24,000. So those segments are going to get more and more competitive because right now you have perhaps one, two EV options, but in the future there's going to be a dozen of them, and prices are going to keep going low, keep getting lower, and probably ranges are also going to increase. So you have sort of a perfect storm.
Yeah, and operating lower, and they're putting a lot of fancy technology in EVs
Yeah.
so to attract people. Hopefully those fancy technologies are making it to Latin America as well.
Yeah, there is a lot of excitement when people go to these Chinese cars that are like super technologic. I think that's going to be like a second. It was like I said before, I think price is going to be the main factor here. We need
Sure.
to have real price parity, and then everything else come as an additional thing. But as long as there is price parity, the change is going to be swift. There is another factor that I forgot to mention, and it doesn't apply to Peru, but it does apply to Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and I think Brazil. And it's that we have very polluted cities. Bogota's air is basically unbreathable. So restrictions for combustion vehicles are very high. I was telling you before we started that today is carless day in Bogota. So basically, if you have a car today, you cannot go with your car in Bogota. I have
But do
my,
they allow electric cars on the
yeah,
road?
electric cars are allowed.
Oh, perfect.
So, and in Bogota, in a normal week, you're going to be restricted one of every 2 days. Like on weekends, free for all, but in weekdays, there is one day you can go out and there is one day you cannot go out. And that's for environmental reasons. But EVs are exempt. And it's the same in Mexico City and it's the same in Santiago. And that's bringing a lot of interest because people want to be able to use their car every day.
Great. So, what are some of the biggest challenges facing EV adoption in Latin America, and how can be addressed?
Well, I think price is one of the main ones, but I think we've covered. So what else we have? Infrastructure is still very limited, and even though it's enough, it's like it's good enough. You want to have more than good enough. You want to have a trustworthy infrastructure. So let me tell you an example from here, from Colombia. My grandfather lives in a city 200 kilometers to the north, and my father lives in a city 200 kilometers to the south. Sorry, I'm not used to speaking a lot in English and my tongue gets all mingled up. There is one station in either of these roads, and that station has one charging point. So basically, you can check in an app if the station is working But if you get there and it suddenly is not working, then you're screwed. If you get there and there is a car already charging, then you have to wait. And that has not been a problem yet, but it will be a problem. But we are not investing public funds on that. So it has fallen 100% on the private sector, and the private sector will not make investments until it can see that it can get a return on the investments, and that's going to take a while. Infrastructure is also a problem in big cities because Colombia in particular, but also Santiago in Chile, is very tall building, have a lot of tall buildings in Colombia. So people live mostly in apartments. And a lot of people don't own their parking spots, but they are like public or communal spots. So we need to have some sort of system that allows a charging provider to charge different people in the same place somehow. I know this exists, but we have to implement them and we have to do it economically because if the doing this is going to double the price for these people, then it is no longer make sense. Then you may as well go with a. I think those are the main ones, and the other one is trust. It's very sad that legacy companies are not being able to provide cheap EVs because legacy companies have a lot of trust. But all these new companies, well, they have to gain the trust of the people, and that's going to take a while. There are models, legacy company, most of them built in China, that have been arriving and they have been selling a lot because they already have the trust of the people. And there is one company with a lot of trust in this region, which is BYD, because they have been here for a long time, like 12 years. But new companies, they will have to fight to earn the trust of the consumer.
So, how can governments, companies, and individuals in Latin America work together to promote EV adoption?
Um,
And are there any international bodies that are helping, any global entities that are helping?
I don't think there are international bodies. I think there are national institutions and collectives, cooperatives, organizations, I don't know the exact name, that are working to promote EVs. Not many international ones, mostly national level. What they do is like they basically spread that if you have an EV, you can charge at home, you can charge at any 110-volt spot. Big are placing rapid charging stations here and there so that people have this option in case they don't own their parking spots. And I think that has to be done. Like you have to people that this is a viable option. That's the main thing. And to do that, you have to first distribute information because there is a lot of misinformation going on with EVs. That they to be changed before 3 years, that they spend twice electricity as on gasoline, that they have to be repaired all the time. A lot of things that are just not true. Um, I have an motorcycle, not a car, but still an EV. Actually, I was because I can go out in my motorcycle. Normal motorcycles, combustion motorcycles cannot. And people are really surprised when I tell them, "No, I simply charge at any outlet that I want." Really? They thought that you need like a special machine. So you have to promote awareness, and I think the main focus must be in the public service companies, like those who provide electricity, because they have the resources to place some infrastructure, they have the cost structure, they know how much they need to charge. Many of these are fully or partially owned by the government. So it's them that can really provide the security that we need to make this change in the cases when they don't have the possibility to do it because they own their parking spot and they simply need to put a charger there.
Are there any innovative EV related projects or initiatives in Latin America that you're particularly excited about?
There are a few, but I'm not really excited about them. I'm on the fence. I'm waiting. There is Olinia in Mexico. Claudia Chainbaum, the Mexican, she wants to build a cheap EV for the Mexican masses. It's called
It
Olinia,
looks
but
nice.
yeah, but they are only starting now. I believe Mexico has what it needs to do it, but it's going to be a very big challenge for Mexico still. And there was this big company that made electric motorcycles in Brazil. I had a lot of hope, and then I have not heard for them in a long time. I don't even I don't know their name. And aside from that, no. Like sadly, we are not a region that's not a lot of development in the technological areas. So we are mostly importing technology from China. in this case, China and South Korea.
Have battery swapping come to America?
No, not. I don't. I don't think there's a single station in the region. They're new.
Not even in Africa. Some countries
Oh,
they
that's
have battery
right.
swapping for motorcycles.
Okay, yes, I was wrong. Are battery swapping stations. Gogoro, the Taiwanese company, arrived in Colombia in last year in March or April. They do have 4 stations in Bogota. There are also some in Santiago. But the issue is that I checked their motorcycle. It is probably it was 4 times the price of an equivalent gasoline motorcycle when it came out. It is now 3 times the price, so it has come down, but not nearly enough. But the worst part is that this is a motorcycle that you require to change the batteries. You do not have the option to charge it at your place, and the cost of exchanging the battery is pretty much very similar to gasoline. So there is no reason to buy one of these motorcycles instead of a gasoline one. There was some initiative on battery swapping station for new scooters in Medellin and also I believe in Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro. But as far as I know, those were not successful because the amount of bikes was not enough. Because sadly, the two-wheeler segment is like very, very far behind, and that's problematic, I think.
What about the state of DC or high-speed chargers? What is the highest speed chargers that you see?
It's enough. It's good enough. Good. It's not great. It's not as bad as people think. Like people, once again, we are talking about misinformation and all these ideas that people have about EVs. People think that basically you cannot charge anywhere outside your house. Not really. In Colombia, the main roads are now covered. We have stations like every 180 kilometers with one charging spot each. So, as I said, you have to be patient if there is already a person there, but you're not going to be stranded. Chile has a decent network. Uruguay has a very good network, but it's an older network with mostly 20 kilowatt AC chargers. Brazil is more of a challenge because Brazil is so big. But all the southern part of Brazil, which is the wealthiest one and also the most populated one, is also covered with enough stations. I think Mexico is also good enough. Costa Rica and Panama have a decent number of stations. Like it's not really that bad, but you still have to be prepared to wait. You still have to have like a couple apps. It's not like with the gasoline that you go pull up, somebody serves you and it's ready. No, you have to be prepared. You have to plan your trip. And I know that some people don't like that. Some people want to be able to just go wherever they want, whenever they want. And I think it's going to take a while until we are at that point where the network is so developed that you simply arrive and connect and don't have to worry about anything.
So, are there any private companies that are uh, trying to expand the network?
I think it is private company trying to expand the charging network. In Colombia, for example, it is Terpel, which is a provider. I think partially owned by the government. In Chile, it is Enel, which is a local electricity provider. The governments have not been very keen on investing money on this because, well, they don't see it as a priority, and I get it. The many governments are already exempting EVs from tariffs. They are providing incentives, so they have sort of this attitude of, okay, well, whenever enough EVs are in the road, networks will just pop up, as it happened with gasoline 100 years ago. We can just wait for that to happen. But it's mainly either electricity providers or in the case of Colombia, it is a gasoline provider that's trying to be the first in the game. And also an electricity provider called Celsia, but Celsia has only like 3 rapid charging stations. Bell has like 25, I think.
That's good to hear that a gasoline provider is getting into the electric charging business.
Yeah, it's interesting. I thought we're going to be the last ones, and no, they were the first ones.
So, what are your thoughts on the latest models and technologies coming to Latin America uh, from within anywhere?
That's a good question. There is one thought about Tesla because we were expecting Tesla in Colombia and Brazil last year. It didn't arrive, so I don't know what happened. I I used to joke that was just before Elon fired like a lot of people. I don't know if he fired the people who were in charge of that. That was my joke, but perhaps it was true. I don't know. Aside from Tesla, which would have had a lot of success here because they have very competitive models in the like low luxury segment. Aside from Tesla, I believe I'm the most excited by cheap cars that have not been announced yet in the region because we do need more affordable models. We need affordable SUV-ish cars, which there aren't a lot of, and we need affordable hatchback and small sedan and city cars. And for example, one model that I'm looking with a lot of expectations is the GAC hatchback that they are coming out. I don't remember the name. It's coming out in China this year, but they are also probably going to bring it to a lot of Latin American countries, and GAC has very good pricing. But all these models with super high technology, like super advanced integration computers, or self-driving, I'm not excited because they are very cool, but they are not going to make a difference here. We need affordable cars. That's what we need, and affordable motorcycles.
So my next question was about autonomous vehicles. What do you think autonomous vehicles coming to Latin
I
America?
think going to take a while because we have chaotic cities. There are a lot of potholes here. I don't know how good are going to be autonomous vehicles at leading. For example, in Bogota, we have a joke that your lane is in your heart because there are a lot of roads that have no lanes painted. So you kind of calculate where you based upon other cars. Just yesterday, I was driving my mother's car. She has a combustion car, sadly. It was cheaper. And at some point, I found myself in the mid of two lanes. I don't know how it happened, but they are not painted. So you kind of go with it. At some point, you make a mistake and you end up in the middle of the lane. I don't know if an autonomous car is going to be able to deal with that. Like they will have to, and it will take a time. And it's not only that, but we have cheap labor. So the cost of a driver for a truck or something like is not as high as in developed countries. So the economics of it are not here. Of course, if you tell me the price is only 10% more expensive for a cheap car with self-driving and a cheap car without self-driving, then it's going to be different. Then everybody wants self-driving. But until we are at that point where it is like very affordable, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference. I can see it working in a lot of companies that need to, for example, move things around inside their premises. I think they have the biggest incentive, but still, it has to be cheaper than labor, and labor is cheap in Latin America.
Are there any notable EV related startups or entrepreneurs in Latin America that you're following?
Well, there is one, but it is not that big. It's called Quantum. It's a Bolivian quadricycle company. Bolivians, have a lot. They have like, I don't know if they have the biggest reserves or is it Chile, but they are in the lithium triangle.
Yeah, they're like the Saudi lithium
Yeah,
or something.
you have this lithium triangle, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. I'm not sure which one has the bigger reserves, but they share them.
Oh, they all
And
have huge reserves.
yeah,
I knew
and
about Bolivia and Chile. I didn't realize Argentina also
oh
has a
yeah,
lot of lithium.
it's the
Wow.
triangle. It misses Paraguay for like a few kilometers. Paraguayans are very bad. They have very bad luck with this because they could have been also rich. So in any case, Bolivians wanted this lithium to evolve into local companies. So under the support of former Bolivian President Evo Morales, they launched this quadricycle company, which offers affordable quadricycles with lithium batteries. But frankly, I believe a lot of the technology, if not all of them, is imported. I don't know if the batteries are produced locally. I think they are not. They are only assembled locally. I think the cells themselves are built outside Bolivia, but I may be wrong in this because they don't really sell a lot. And it's very hard to find like very good information on them. Like, they exist, like the news because they got a contract or they sold X amount of quantum cars in some country, but normally they are not really that big. That's, I think, the main one that has made it to the news. Another big one, of course, would be Olinia. And there is a third one, Sakua, I think it was called. I'll have to check. It was a Mexican EV company that brands itself as this company that works with, I think it's single mothers. I'm not sure, but they are very artisanal. So they build the cars basically with a lot of not all more like handmade. They are expensive cars. They are not that good, so they don't sell a lot. But if you want like an artisanal car built artisans in Mexico, then you go to that company.
So, what advice would you have for individuals or companies that are looking to get involved in the EV market in Latin America,
My
that are
advice
looking
would
for
be
what, sorry, to get into the Latin American market?
to not compete with another EVs. You have this situation with when somebody arrives and sees, okay, this is the EV, I'm going to go with this price, and they think they're going to make it big, but they don't realize that the EV segment, even in the leading countries like Costa Rica, is still at most 20%. So you don't have very big markets. If you wanna compete, if you wanna enter Latin America, you have to look at gasoline cars and gasoline motorcycles, and you have to compete with them. So that's what the successful EV companies are. That's what BYD does. BYD comes, it looks at the segment not in the EV sector but in the gasoline sector and says, okay, I can charge because I have these advantages over them, but it cannot be too much of a premium because otherwise people will simply buy gasoline. And that's the reason that we don't have successful two-wheeler EV companies because electric motorcycles arrive at prices that compete with other electric motorcycles, but gasoline motorcycles are so much cheaper that there is no chance for them to enter the mainstream market and become a volume player.
How do you stay up to date with the latest developments and trends in the EV industry? And what resources would you recommend to
Okay, so well, I have
other?
several tiers. There is a couple portals that are focused on EVs in Latin America. I think one of them is Mobility Latin America. I don't remember the other one. I have them in my Mozilla navigator browser. Sorry, I forget the word. I have a Mozilla browser, and so I have this list of websites. That's one of them. Then you have the national institutions that provide information for each country. Of course, I every month I look at all of them because I have my database and I want to keep it up to date. So every month I look at Andemos in Colombia, the ACAU in Uruguay, ABE in Brazil, AAC in Chile, AAP in Chile it is the ANAC, in Ecuador is the ACUA, in Costa Rica it's ASMOVE, in Mexico is the National Institute of Statistics and Geography. Like you have to know each one of them, you have to download the information from each one of them, then you have to read it because it is not in the same format. Like each one of them different formats, so you have to read it and then I do that manually. I just pass it to my database in so that I can compare one country to another. And then you have local media. Like there are a lot of auto outlets in Colombia and Latin America. I am subscribed to a few of them. And they are in Facebook. So basically I am browsing Facebook and then I see the news. And they talk about gasoline cars, but they are also very, very invested in EVs. Important in Latin America, except perhaps for Argentina, Latin America has embraced EVs. Like you enter the news, you enter the comments, and people like them. People are hopeful. People believe that they are the future, and that is not happening in Spain. If you go to Spain media, if you go to Spain comments, it's completely different. People hate EVs. People believe they are being forced upon them. So it's pretty particular, but I think that because Latin America has been so positive towards EVs, then regular auto magazines are good enough. If you are subscribed to these regular auto magazines, you are going to get the information on EVs and you can simply ignore the rest.
Are there any personal experiences or anecdotes that you'd like to share? Any interesting anecdotes about the new energy vehicles?
Ooh, I don't know. I'm not. Let me think. I'm not sure. Okay, well, yeah, there's so I don't know how things work in every city, but I know that everywhere you have been seeing this massive amount of electric scooters and small electric bicycles like popping up everywhere. They are like incredibly popular because they are not only hyper affordable, but they are also excluded from most regulations. So you don't need to register them. You don't need to provide um, that to prove that allowed to drive to have a license. Sorry. And I had one of those. It was my first to be a red scooter from China that had a lead acid battery like 28 kilograms. And basically, when I started riding that, I don't know what happened, but the battery would always fail. So we would end up, me and my partner, arriving like with the last mile on it at 10 kilometers per hour, like hoping we would make it home. But it was so cheap. I bought it secondhand, and it costed me, I think, $300. It was something like that. It was absurd, like super cheap. And at the point, my partner had a car, but she needed an alternative option because of what I told you. She could only go to her job once every 2 days in the car, and then she was out of options. And we were living in a place that had not very good public transportation, which is not common in Bogota. In Bogota, every place has a lot of buses, but that one didn't. So we bought that, and I think it was at least 5 times that we were almost stranded. And there was one time where we were actually stranded a couple blocks from home. So I told her, "Oh, just walk, and I'm going to ride it with the little pedals because it had little pedals that they didn't work, but like you could move the with that you couldn't go too far." So that happened. So I think I know better than most people what range anxiety feels like. We ended up selling it and buying a more decent, more powerful, more trustworthy one a couple years later.
Yeah, I had an experience with the Tesla Model 3. I was driving in the mountains of in the Bay Area, going to visit a friend, and there's no signal. There's
Oh,
no signal, and I got lost,
oh.
and I was at almost at zero. But it's still the car drove for 20 miles, so even at zero, it was red at zero, but I was still able to drive, and finally,
Oh,
I was able to call him, and he came and he helped me get to his house, and then I was able to plug it in.
okay, that's lucky. My
It didn't. It had 20 miles after it was zero and red, which was good.
I
Um,
I
what is
convinced my sorry, go ahead.
no? Go ahead.
I was saying I convinced my aunt in Canada to buy a Tesla 5 years ago because they wanted to buy a new car. They were thinking a Jeep, and I was like, okay, Jeep, but why don't you choose one? She was like, oh, let's see, and they liked it, so they bought one. Almost left them stranded. I think they were going from Montreal to Ottawa because they were receiving in Montreal, and the car showed, I don't know, 200 miles or 250 kilometers, and they said, "Ah, that's enough," but it was winter, so it wasn't enough. And they basically arrived with the last charge into their homes. They were like very scared, but it was only time that happened to them. Then they learned that you don't have to trust the calculation fully. And recently I traveled there and I was able to drive it, and it's a very cool car. And they have this amazing infrastructure for charging there, so they have really no issues. It's pretty
I
cool.
know the infrastructure in Canada. I drove from Toronto to Montreal back in 2019, and I was surprised at how many Tesla fast chargers there were everywhere
There are a
back
lot of
then,
them.
and they've ever since. Um, what is the state of two-wheeler and three-wheeler electrification in Latin America?
It's bad. It's bad, and I'm very frustrated that it's that bad, but it's bad. So remember when I told you I've been very focused on price because for me price is king. Like you have to compete in price, then you can offer on other things. Three wheelers are not important in Latin America, even though they are important, but two wheelers are kings. So I don't know if you know this, but Brazil, like you have big markets in the East Asian region and South Asian region, like India, Vietnam, China. They are huge. But when you get to like Turkey or probably Iraq, from there to here, all the western half of the world, we are the big two-wheeler market. So I think Brazil is the big one, and then you have Colombia and Mexico competing for the second one. So we are like very big. Two-wheelers are extremely competitive here. They are very, very, very affordable. You can have two-wheeler, a gasoline like I don't know, $1,000 like that. They are like very affordable. You can get universal service if you need like every small town has at least two, three technical guys fixing these things, these two-wheelers. And the electric segment has just not competed. Like when I purchased my motorcycle, it is a Super Soco. It was more or less twice the price of the equivalent combustion option. And today it's the same. So you really have no incentive. Of course, you're going to save money, but people will be able to travel in these vehicles and you cannot travel in an electric two-wheeler. We see in here all these options that are arriving in Kenya, in India, in Uganda. We don't have that here. Like you can have in Uganda, I think, $1,000 e-motorcycle with 3 or 4 kilowatt batteries. Yeah, that doesn't exist in here. For 4 kilowatt hour battery, you're going to need to pay, I don't know, at least $3,000 or $4,000. And I know that it sounds like a small difference when you live in the United States and you like it's not big, but for us it is very big. So I don't know what's going on, but prices are not coming down. So basically, in Colombia, which is the only market that I do have data on, we are stuck at like a couple thousand sales sold, motorcycles sold a year. Our market for total motorcycles is almost 1 million, so that's nothing.
Yeah, I know in Africa, some of the markets they have detachable batteries, and people just take them to their apartment and charge it,
Yeah.
and then bring it back in the morning and plug it in again.
That's very common here too, because we have a lot of apartments. My motorcycle has a detachable. That's very common, but they are still too expensive, and they are we have no local. We have local assembly lines, but not real producers. And I don't know why, because I feel the car market is getting so competitive. I don't know why the motorcycle market is not the same, but it is not. We still have very high prices, and until that is fixed, we are not going to see massive adoption.
Yeah, I don't know how they in India somehow in the last year they added 500,000 two three-wheeler electric.
India has something like 50% three-wheeler adoption, and they have a big three-wheeler market, something huge.
Yeah, yeah. I'll have to look into how they did it.
Yeah, yeah, I think that for the key, but my personal hypothesis, and this applies to Colombia, but I think it is very likely that this also applies to other countries, is that all these companies focused on the two-wheeler segment, they went for the electric bicycles. So these ones are cheaper, you can move higher volumes, but you're also exempt from a lot of regulations. So they make things simpler for companies. And so sort of nobody has been interested in space. There is an open market space there. If any Chinese or Indian company is listening, there is an open market here for that. But for example, here in Colombia, you have this weird regulation where anything above 350 watts is called like um, a motorcycle. That is called a bicycle, and it's not regulated. And you have a lot of companies that are bringing this $1,000, 80-kilometer range, 75 kilometers per hour speed bicycles. I'm like, yeah, that has a motor, but they are bringing it as a bicycle in these very small frames to avoid regulations.
So, what's the state of electrification for buses?
It's good. Santiago in Chile has a lot of electric buses. I think Santiago has, I think has like 2,500. Colombia comes second with 2,000, no, 1,800, I think. And all other countries are slowly entering. I think it was a couple years ago that battery prices got low enough that buses with 300 kilometers range, which is sort of what you need for a city around here in a day, got similar cost to normal buses, to gasoline buses. And at that point, interest has been rising. A lot of cities are starting to get into the segment. But of course, you don't really buy a lot of buses. Like you do that once every few years. So in Colombia, it is a given that new big bus purchases in the big cities, at least, are going to be electric. I think that's also true for Chile and for Brazil and probably for Mexico. But it's going to take a while because we are not like you see in Europe and probably in states in the US, you will see that they will take buses that are still working and they are going to throw them away and replace them with cleaner technologies. Yeah, we don't do that. We to work the buses until they die and then we replace them because we want to save money. It's not the
Will
best.
they replace them here and then they sell them to Africa or Latin
Oh yeah,
America or Asia?
that works too. Yeah, what happens here sometimes is that they sell these buses to smaller cities or to private bus companies. But something that we do have in all of Latin America, but in Colombia in particular, we have massive intercity bus systems. Like they are huge. I can go to my grandpa my grandfather's house, located in a small city. That's where I was born. It's only I think 150,000 people live, so it's not a big city. It's very small. If I go to Bogota's terminal, I can basically get a bus to that city every 30 minutes from 4 a.m. to 10 p.m. So it's like a full service. No matter what time I arrive, I'm going to get a bus and I'm going to get there. And those ones are going to be much harder to electrify because they are privately operated and because the distances are long. And they need to be able to refuel and go, refuel and go, refuel and go. I don't have very high hopes for, but the city buses, I do have high hopes for.
Um, what uh, we talked about a while ago in Paraguay. So Paraguay, I know have lithium, but they've had this cheap electricity from
Yeah.
their waterfall forever, which is almost super inexpensive. So why move forward in electrification? They can save so much money on imported fuel.
Yeah, well, to be completely honest, don't know because Paraguay is a mystery. Paraguay is a country which is very hard to find information about. I was checking Paraguayan's news outlets a few days ago, it was last week, and it seemed that they may have higher EV penetration than I first thought. It seems that they may be at 4 or 5% already, but it's so hard to know because there are no sources. It's a very small country. I don't know if you know this, but Paraguay is the only South American countries where you almost have no street view. I don't know why.
No,
But
no, what?
street view, like Google Street View.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can. I can show you in Street View in Bogota. I can show you my grandfather's farm in the middle of nothing in Street View. But Paraguay has no Street View. It's like a
Hmm.
very dark country in the sense that you don't really see what's going on there. But if I may present a hypothesis, they get a lot of money by selling a lot of electricity to Argentina and Brazil. And I don't know if they may believe that if they start using the electricity, then they lose on revenue. That may be a case, but it's only a hypothesis because I don't really know what's going on in Paraguay, and I don't think many people do. I've been trying to get more information on Paraguay, but it's hard.
I know. I was in Paraguay in 2018, and I did see some charging stations at a big mall there. And I said, "Wow, these guys are so far ahead," but nothing came of it. It seems like they just did a little bit and then they didn't really follow through with it.
Yeah, that happens a lot. Colombia, a few charging stations like in 2018, and then nothing happened for like 3 years. And then suddenly in 2024, we exploded and they started installing more stations.
So I hear a lot of good things about Uruguay. What's happening there in electrification?
Okay, well, they have a particular of favorable circumstances. So they have a lot of wind energy, but the excess they can sell to Brazil. So they are in a good situation where they don't really suffer the intermittency. They are basically fully covered by wind, and then they have an excess that gets them extra money, even if they sell it at very low prices. Then they are very wealthy. Like you have in Latin America, the two wealthiest countries, which are Chile and Paraguay, they have sort of followed different approaches. So more free market, a more liberalized country. And you has fallen a lot of the European model of high taxes, high costs, high standards. So they have these huge taxes on gasoline. So they have very expensive gasoline. So for example, right now, EVs are cheaper in Colombia, are cheaper in Costa Rica, they are cheaper in Mexico than in Uruguay. But in Uruguay, having a gasoline car is so expensive that it makes up for the difference.
I see. And they also transitioned to completely renewable energy the last 15 years, right? So they're,
Yeah, they installed a lot of wind turbines. Solar was expensive back then. I think wind was not that expensive. They had money. And I think I've read, I'm telling you this second-hand information. If any Uruguayan listens to this and it is not correct, please do correct me. But I think that the main reason that they did this, it was the 2008 crash. It hurt them very badly, and they were very vulnerable to oil costs and fossil fuel costs. And when those were like this, and then got to $120 after 2010. They were badly hurt. It was like very hard for the country. So they said, like, we need something else. And wind was expensive, but it is a fixed cost. Like you install it, you know you're going to pay through the years. So you are no longer open to this sort of fossil fuels. I think I have read that that was the reason that they did that.
And what's happening in Costa Rica?
Well, Costa Rica is the Norway of Latin America. They are very
Hmm.
advanced. They had a few months in 2024 where they were like 25% electric car market share. Uh, have no local industries. They have no real interest in protecting combustion vehicles. They are very known for this environmental position, so they have advantages on EVs. I believe that in the San Jose, you also have exemptions for EVs that gasoline cars cannot go out, but EVs can. And as soon as EVs got cheap in 2023, then sales ramped up. And actually, after October or September 2024, we have seen that sales have come down. Like they used to be at 20%, now they are like 12, 13%. I don't know what's come, but I'm guessing that it's like the seasonality of the market. We're going to probably see them back up again this year. But basically, they have, and of course, Uruguay and Costa Rica are not all oil producers, so they really have no interest in keep importing oil.
So, which EV brands are doing the best? You mentioned BYD is doing very well. BYD and who else are doing well?
Well, it varies by market, but it's basically BYD, and then you have Geely, and then okay, well, BYD is the leader. But Geely has strong presence in Uruguay and Costa Rica. And in the rest of the region, Volvo has a strong presence, and the Volvo EX30 has had like a big success. But it's still an expensive car, so it's not going to be a mass market model that's going to turn the tides, but it's doing good. Then you have that some brands have success in some markets. So, for example, I think in Uruguay, Jack, which is a brand that it has an assembly line in Mexico. Jack has been successful in Uruguay with the Jack E30X because it is a cheap hatchback, basically. And then you have in Colombia Kia. Kia brought the Kia EV5, and it has been a huge success.
It's a nice car.
Yeah, it's
Right.
basically has price parity with competition. It's a very big car for Colombian standards. Like I know for the United States it's medium sized probably,
So,
but
is
for
it
us
made in Korea or is it
no,
made in China?
it's made in China. But people
Oh,
don't care. I think people don't
oh,
know.
sure. It's the same
People just
thing.
go to a Kia place, they see a pretty car and they buy it. And that's something that I have been wondering a long time why more brands are not doing that. Because I think that's the way to go if you keep your market share. But they didn't do that and now they are left behind. And then I don't know which other brands. For example, in Brazil, you have Great Wall Motors, which is huge in Brazil because they have this local factory. But the problem with Great Wall Motors is that we don't really know how much of their cars are hybrids and how much are plug-in hybrids. So we are sort of in the fence there. And then in Chile, I think Maxus is important. I think there are brands that sort of get some advantage in some markets, but most of it is BYD and Geely.
And what is the state of manufacturing or assembly? Which brands are doing that?
Ooh, okay. Brazil has three factories building at least plug-in hybrids, and one of them is building battery electric vehicles. So it has BYD in Camaçari. It has Great Wall Motors building the Haval in Semapolis. I forgot. And then you have the Cherry plant. I don't remember what that is, but they produce the Tigo 7 PHEV, and I think they are going to start producing the Cherry EQ7 at some point. Then you have in Mexico, which is the big player in Latin America, Mexico. A lot of legacy auto are starting to produce EVs in Mexico, but I think they also have the Jack assembly producer, but they want to start producing. There is a local Mexican company that used to make solar panels. They want to make EVs. They created their own brand. They basically rebrand Chinese cars, but they also want to start building them. UAD wants to open a factory in Mexico. Morris Garages, MG, which is owned by SAIC, wants to build a factory in Mexico. And Kia, BMW, they will start producing EVs soon in Mexico. And I think, oh yeah, Stellantis also produces EVs in Mexico. The Jeep, the new Jeep, I think, in Mexico. And aside from these two, not too many. Like right now in Colombia, it has made the news that BYD is going to start assembling the chassis of buses and trucks in Colombia because we normally import the chassis and then we build the rest of the car here. but they want to start making the assembly here. I think Colombia makes sense because Colombia sells a lot of buses. We are very bus dependent as a country because we have almost no trains or trams or metro lines. And I think that's it. I probably missing one of a couple, but I don't know of any other company having operations in Latin America.
What is the state of that BYD plant in Brazil that we keep hearing stories about?
I don't know. I have
And
been
when will
trying
it be
to.
completed?
I have no idea what went on with all these scandals. It seems it wasn't as bad as they originally thought, but the Brazilian media has not been reporting a lot on it. And my Portuguese, well, you can understand Portuguese as a Spanish, but it's not a full understanding. But I believe that they are expected to start producing cars at some point this year and probably these 6 months.
Well, is there anything else that you like that we didn't cover that you would like to?
Let me think. Well, I think it's there's something, a couple things, and I believe for so long we have believed that the energy transition in general was something that was reserved for rich countries because it was expensive and you needed to subsidize it somehow. But I think the tides are turning, and I think a lot of people are not realizing the tides are turning. And I think that we are entering a situation where it's already cheaper, but it is less convenient. And it is not only EVs, but for example, solar panels, because solar panels, at some point you no electricity, so you have a blackout, or wind. And I think this set of conditions is going to turn the situation around. And we are going to start seeing how the poorest countries, like even the poorest, the ones that have the less amount of resources, I'm talking Zimbabwe or I don't know, Congo, countries like that are going to be the biggest adopters of these technologies because when you are that poor, you don't really care about convenience. You need the energy, even if it's intermittent. And that's also going to happen a lot with EVs. Like you are going to start seeing a lot of poor countries massively adopting EVs in the next 5 years, even if they can only charge them some of the time, even if they can only go to some places, because for us, price is more important than convenience. That applies less for countries that like Uruguay or Brazil, which are wealthier, or Chile, and more like for countries like I don't know Honduras or Bolivia, which are poorer. But I believe it applies for the global South as a whole. We don't really care about convenience, and new technologies are also going to see the pattern. Like for example, I don't know if when they're coming, but I believe airplanes are going to be like huge in these countries with big mountains. It is so hard for us to build roads. It is so hard for us to maintain roads, and then suddenly you get this thing that switches the flying, and then it's cheaper to fly shorter distances. That's going to make a big change everywhere in the poorer countries. So I think I would ask that people is looking for that, because I believe that there is going to be a change. And at some point in the future, in the next decade, probably, we're going to see that the poorer countries that once were not expected to have clean energy, green energy, because it was going to be the ones massively adopting it. And they are going to come up with solutions because, people are inventive, people find solutions. And perhaps we are going to see how those solutions could be now used to maintain comfort in the richer countries while bringing now these options in a more comprehensive way.
And these drones are coming with one or two. Yeah, I know solar and batteries have gone down in price like tremendous. Yeah, and they expect batteries to follow suit, and these drones are coming with one or two person areas if they have sufficient range, and if they
Yeah,
have solar or some way to charge them at multiple locations.
exactly. I have high hopes. I believe a lot of countries are going to be very benefited for this because we don't have the resources. My grandfather's farm it's in a road. They spent a lot of money. They built 6 bridges, and then 4 of those 6 bridges are now down because the region is like super unstable. And they messed up. They did not make the studies, but then an engineer was telling me, "How do you make the studies for this? Like you need a team of PhDs and years, and we don't have that. You just build the roads and you hope for the best, and in the case the best failed." But these technologies are available for solving those issues with much less investment. So I think they are going to make a change in the way we live.
Well, thank you so much, Juan. I really appreciate your time, and I hope we will talk again at some point during this year to for an update. Yeah.
Okay, no, thank you for the. I'm very glad to be here. I'm also very happy that Latin America, as I said, was a region that it's usually normally in the periphery. Nobody thinks about Latin America. So I'm glad that you found it to talk about what's going on around here. I believe a lot of changes are coming, and I think it's going to be faster than most people expect. So be attentive for the next couple years because big things are coming.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Please comment and subscribe to the Clean Titans channel. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.